Okay, so this theory came up with 2 weeks ago-ish when Tommy Andresen, one of the creators of Ninjago, responded to a tweet from a fan saying sum up Season 16 in one word, and he said conclusion. So that got me thinking, does this mean Season 16 will be the end of Ninjago? I know a lot of people are saying no, because there's so much to be, other things that need to be concluded, and I agree, I don't think it is. But that's not because of that. That is because of what I would say is the Ninjago Theory. Basically, the Ninjago Theory is kind of my sort of version of what people call the Disney Theory, which is how all the Disney Pixar theories interconnect. So yeah, that's basically what this is the Ninjago version. So yeah, let's dive into what it is. So there are currently 15 seasons of Ninjago. The movie, Day of the Departed, the pilots and all of that. So essentially, my Ninjago theory is basically about how they are split up and things, which you may or may not disagree with, but that's just your opinion. So yeah, I will explain it now. The Ninjago theory starts with the first 3 seasons of Ninjago, which I would call sort of the Overlord or the Garmadon or sort of the Golden Trilogy, because obviously in Season 1 you've got the Golden Weapons, in Season 2 it's the Golden Ninja, and in Season 3 it is the Golden Master. You could alternatively sort of call it sort of the original 3 in a way, but yeah, so that is how I would say the original 3 sort of, they're the first 3, that's sort of their trilogy. I would then say that number 4, 5, and 6 are then the next trilogy on, and so the reason that is just because sort of while they're not interconnected in the same way, they are sort of all lead on from one another. Season 4's villain gets defeated, which opens up the doorway for Season 5's villain, which is defeated, which leads up to Season 6 villain being sort of opened up and allowed to come back. So they all kind of, their consequences all allow the next person to come on. So I guess you could call it the consequence sort of trilogy or whatever. But yeah, that's how I would classify this sort of trilogy. Now this is where things start to get a little bit complicated, because we obviously have Season 7. And so I'd definitely say Season 7 and Day of the Departed are connected in their way. But then obviously there's no extra things, there's no third movie for that trilogy without going on to the only trilogy, and obviously that's its own trilogy already pre-established. So the way I sort of worked this one out is that Season 7 was originally sort of meant to have its next season, but the film sort of, they were like, oh, let's go with the film, So I feel like if Season 7 had not had the film after it, they would have continued with that story. And I would also say that I potentially believe is because of the whole chronological explanation of it, that this season will have its sort of third season of the trilogy, if that makes sense, in maybe a couple seasons time within the next few seasons. Obviously he said conclusion, and one of that things that could mean is the end of Crocs and the Chronics, because they were never concluded the first time round. I believe maybe they could be concluded in the next season. It could be about them coming back, and maybe then they could go back in time and not make Nia spin around and merge with the water or something. But yeah, so I think that is where it gets complicated, and it could be classed as 2 instead of 3, and obviously Dead Departed and Season 7 grouped together there, because obviously Dr. Sanders is kind of in them and stuff. Obviously you then have the only trilogy, which is already classed as a trilogy, which kind of leads up to the end of Ninjago, the original Spinjitzu Masters Ninjago, and so that, yeah, self-explanatory really, it's the only trilogy. So now I would say that the next 3 are Season 11, Season 12, and Season 13. They are their trilogy. So I would say that they are a trilogy because they all kind of give the original 4 ninja a focus. So Season 11 is Kai and Zane, and that's split into 2 parts, so it's basically 2 seasons at the end of the day. I don't really know why it's not 2 seasons, but obviously then Season 12 is Jay, and Season 13 is Cole. So that kind of splits the trilogy into 3, and it's kind of the original trilogy, but each one of the new old ninja gets their own sort of part of the season. And so the final trilogy that we have to talk about is Season 14, 15, and I would say 16. And now, the reason I would say that 16 is part of it is because it obviously follows the trilogy trend, and also because I believe that Season 16 will also follow on with the story about sort of Gojira and his battle with the first Ninjutsu Master, as that has been talked about in season 14 and season 15. And obviously, that's quite important. And it's all interconnected, so it's all about the Keepers and the Melopians and all that. And I think season 16, maybe we'll find out more about Gojira and stuff, and it'll be the conclusion to that trilogy. Because, yeah, that would make sense with the theory. Now, the pilots aren't included in the trilogy because a pilot doesn't necessarily have the opportunity to become a TV show, and a lot of time pilots never become anything if they're not popular, and they're kind of their own thing. So I don't class them because that wasn't necessarily planned with a TV show in mind. But then again, if you wanted to class it, I could say that you could change the theory around, and instead of having 1, 2, and 3 seasons in their own, you could say the pilots 1, 2 are their own trilogy. 3, 4, and 5 are their own trilogy, as they're like the new trilogy after Ninjago was revived. And then 6, 7, and the Day of the Departed are then their trilogy. Then you've got the Oni trilogy, obviously, which is its own thing. And so, yeah, that could be classed as how you do it, so that those 3 make sense. And I guess that makes sense too, but at the end of the day, as I said before, I believe that 6 or 7, the Day of the Departed, and we're going to have an extra season with it. They just didn't in the end, which is why that doesn't quite work. So, sort of using this theory, we can predict that Ninjago obviously has at least 1 season left of this trilogy. It's 14, 15, and 16, and then how many seasons are they going to have after that? Well, I would say maybe 1 trilogy more, or maybe 2. I think it kind of quite clearly goes in trilogies, and so I think there is going to be another trilogy after this, focusing on something else. What it will focus on, I don't know, but I still feel like there's a lot to be expanded upon, and so another trilogy is probably imminent. Another way you could, I guess, sum up is, some people might say, what about the Vengestone trilogy in a way? Because 14, 15, not 15 so much, 14 so much, but 13, 15, 16, they're, I guess, the Vengestone trilogy. And obviously you've got Old Ninjago and New Ninjago. They're kind of, New Ninjago is starting to get as big or as long as Old Ninjago, although I wouldn't say as good. And so, yeah, you could say that could be a split. That's where they kind of divide right now. And so maybe I would like to see New Ninjago go on for as long as Old Ninjago, at the very least. This has very much become, over the last sort of 2 weeks since I've come up with it, my own personal sort of head canon. This is what I believe and perceive it to be, so I use this to predict what's going to happen next. And yeah, so I do really believe that this is correct to some capacity. And yeah, I mean, Day of the Departed was meant to be a full season, so if you don't agree with the fact that I counted it in this as a series so much, I can kind of not understand you there. I believe it should be counted as a full season. And yeah, I get that you're like the flaw with 6, 7, Day of the Departed, but at the same time, I think that is acceptable. I think I've come up with a good reason, and it makes sense. And yeah, that's pretty much this video over. So I guess like and subscribe and comment.